When we think of communication, we probably tend to think in traditional terms. Through art, science, culture, and technology, the human race has developed unparalleled methods to communicate in concrete ways. But there can also be more subtle and diffuse forms of communication. For example, must all communication occur between people and places that are in the same time or spatial realm? Are there communications that are not readily apparent or explainable? How do our conceptions of cosmology, or the ways in which we perceive our lives and world, influence our understanding of communication? Thomas Jefferson emphasized that there would be no subject to which Congress might not need to refer. By delving into the holdings of the Library of Congress, we will explore how the past, present, and future may be connected by communication some might call to and from beyond.
Knowledge TV Retro, brought to you by Jones International University, the first fully online accredited university. Change your life for the better on your schedule. 8-week classes begin next month. Visit jiu.edu to find out more.
Our views of life, death, and creation are fundamental to the way we interact with our world. Often these beliefs are reflected in the religious ideas of society.
The cosmology or the story of a people is intimately related to that relationship with a bioregion, with the life in a region. The landscape shimmers with the heroic character of these stories. It's that relationship then with the natural world which gives cosmologies its force of relatedness to individuals. And that's what religion transmits.
To enter the afterlife, ancient Egyptians believed they would have their heart weighed against a feather. While the rationale for such a belief may be lost in the mists of time, in some parts of the world, traditional ideas still affect the day-to-day lives of people. Every summer in Japan, people attempt to communicate with their ancestors. Ceremonies that invoke the spirit of those that have gone before take place during the Obon festival. As well as sharing food and other earthly pleasures with the spirits of their ancestors, the Obon festival goers celebrate with dance. The day ends with a ceremony that helps the spirits return to the netherworld in small paper boats. Another culture that communes with ancestors is that of Mexico. During the annual celebration of the Day of the Dead,
its significance is to honor the memory. The celebration includes creation of altars, the foods that they like, the books that they like, the films that they like, whatever they happen to enjoy in real life are brought back in on the altar. This semblance also takes place in going into cemeteries, to the actual tomb where someone is buried, and having a meal on the tomb with them in celebration. Let's not forget, in both the pre-Columbian society of Mexico, but also in the Christian society of Europe, there was always a feeling of praying for the soul of the person to reach heaven or to reach a higher life, and this is what is going on within the Day of the Dead.
I'd say we could swing all the way from Africa through East Asia and into the indigenous American worlds. And generally speaking, there is a very intense concern with the dead.
Communities across the world, from the most sophisticated to the primitive, have some relationship with an afterlife. That connection is often rationalized in religious belief. When we return, we'll explore communication between our world and that of the supernatural. Throughout time, there have been those who sought to harness the supernatural in order to perform miraculous feats. From these attempts stemmed the practice of alchemy, with its bid to change base metals into gold, and witchcraft.
The debunking of witchcraft began in print in 1584 with the publication of a book called The Discovery of Witchcraft by a man named Reginald Scott, who decided to confront the prejudices existing in Elizabethan courts and at the level of village life, prejudices that were leading to the condemnation, the torture, and the death of predominantly elderly women. He was, in fact, confronting profound beliefs at the popular level, and more dangerous to himself, he was confronting the law that was supported by the monarchs of his time. And so in his book, A Discovery of Witchcraft, Reginald Scott seeks to demonstrate that supernatural manifestations can in fact be brought about by very, very human skills. He was an individual who loved magic. And in writing this work, he gives us 70 pages in which he describes conjuring tricks, how they're done, including an illustration of the decapitation illusion.
Sometimes otherworldly communication apparently forges unlikely alliances. Benjamin Brown French, a 19th century public servant in Washington, D.C., records an encounter with the supernatural in his 11-volume journal, now housed at the Library of Congress.
He was persuaded to visit a medium here in Washington, a Mrs. Laurie, and while there, he attempted to get in touch with Andrew Jackson. And according to the evidence here, the attempt was successful. The medium, Mrs. Laurie, under the impress of Andrew Jackson's spirit, wrote out a message for Benjamin Brown French. And Benjamin, in his journal, goes on for several pages discussing the circumstances of the seance. And then he took the message that Mrs. Laurie had written out for him in Andrew Jackson's hand and placed that in the back of his journal here. And the interesting thing about it is that the signature looks quite similar to Andrew Jackson's own.
Other U.S. presidents have been closely associated with the leading mediums of their time.
When Garfield was a young man, he attended a seance by one of the Fox sisters. And in his journal, he provides an account of what took place at that seance. I called for the spirit of my father. It responded by rapping. It was later demonstrated, probably not beyond peradventure, that the rapping was caused probably by the ability of these sisters to make noises with their toe joints.
The death of Abraham Lincoln's son, Willie, brought communication via seances to the highest levels of government.
Mary was extremely disturbed after Willie's death. And Mary was so distraught that she did attempt to contact Willie. And Mary attended the seances and actually took Lincoln, and 3 or more were held in the White House.
Although Lincoln didn't believe in seances, he felt a dream he had repeatedly of approaching the shore was a good omen.
Lincoln claimed to have had the same dream before several major victories: Gettysburg, Vicksburg, Atlanta. In fact, when he was told to expect news from Atlanta, he was convinced it would be good because he had already had that same dream. And he had premonitions of death. He dreamed one time after working in his study, and his dream was that he heard some noises, and he followed the sound, and it was wailing, and he came eventually to a catafalque, and the people around, obviously very grief-stricken, and he asked who had died, and they said the president was assassinated, and then there was more wailing. It happened shortly before his actual assassination.
After Lincoln's death, Mary Todd Lincoln continued to try and communicate with the spirit of her husband. Spiritualism has had a mixed reception over the years. One person who wanted to demonstrate its dishonesty was Harry Houdini, who drew on his own ability to deceive.
He was quite capable of doing the magic that others could do, the close-up magic of the time. But he had something more. He had a great ability to dramatize escapes, and he had an intricate knowledge of mechanisms and how to get himself out of them in a way that seemed magical, that seemed far more than human. He was a true showman. One of Houdini's specialties was water tricks, He escaped from crates that had been thrown into lakes, rivers, etc. He would be handcuffed, he would be in chains, he would be put into the crate would be thrown into the river, and lo and behold, Houdini would escape.
The film collections of the Library of Congress include newsreels of Houdini's stunts and movies in which he acted. He appeared in a number of films before establishing his own production company. As writer, producer, director, and star, Houdini was able to demonstrate his skills as an illusionist. He also explored subjects that interested him, including reincarnation. In The Man from Beyond, Houdini's character is restored to life after being frozen in ice for a number of years. His adventures culminate in a spectacular rescue sequence at Niagara Falls, in which Houdini performs all his own stunts without resorting to trick photography. Other films feature Houdini's abilities as an escapologist and illusionist. His knowledge of illusion launched him on a crusade to show that those who claimed supernatural powers were no more than illusionists themselves.
Debunking mediums was a way of presenting himself as the man of learning who would debunk that lower form of magic that was represented by the medium, who used conjuring skills, which Houdini recognized, to induce the credulous to believe that there was a supernatural power here that could put them in contact with individuals from the beyond.
Houdini struck up a friendship with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, even though they held opposing views on the supernatural.
They really came to odds over the medium Marjorie, who was Houdini's greatest challenge. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle supported Marjorie Crandon, and she in turn had managed to persuade certain members of the investigatory committee of the Scientific American that she was genuinely in communication with the beyond, that the supernatural manifestations that she produced were real. Houdini took on the task of exposing her, which he never completely did. She was his greatest challenge. She was someone he could not truly, totally debunk, but he did prevent her from receiving the prize of the Scientific American.
Houdini would have liked to believe in the power of spiritualism. He had been close to his mother and desperately tried to contact her after her death. However, he eventually turned his back on communication with ghosts. He frequently demonstrated how seances could be faked and even made spiritualist illusion part of his stage act in order to further debunk it. Houdini's role on life's stage ended abruptly in 1926. Backstage one night, a young man asked if it were true that he could sustain a heavy punch to the stomach. Houdini didn't have time to brace himself, and the punch he received ruptured his appendix, causing peritonitis. A few days later, he was dead. But that wasn't quite the end of the Houdini story, for he had made a pact with his wife, Bess, that if it were possible to make contact from beyond the grave, he would. Thereafter, on each anniversary of his death, Bess tried to contact Houdini through a seance. On the 10th anniversary, she tried again.
We are watching and waiting, Harry. Levitate the table. Move it. Lift the table. Move it. Rap on it. Spell out a code, Harry. Do it, Harry. Please.
The Houdini shrine has burned for 10 years. I now reverently turn out the light. Good night, Harry.
Many mediums have tried to contact Houdini since. He still hasn't made himself heard. Perhaps amongst the most spiritual of peoples communicating with other worlds are members of the Native American tribes. When we return, we will venture into their world and gain intimate insights about their communication with the spirits that influence their lives. Indigenous Indian nations of North America hold beliefs whose origins stretch back before written history. Many of those beliefs center around the ebb and flow of communication between the land, a great spirit, and the people who are its children. Debunking is an elder of the Seminole tribe, a religious leader and medicine ways healer.
is God, one who gives and one who takes the breath of life. And I ask God to guard our children. Whatever we do, whatever we touch, can only good come from it. Our spirituality with God is in tune with everything else, but we see things, I think, a little deeper. And then when people come by and you hold this sweet grass, then they take hold of it and cup their hands and put it on themselves. And some of us do it to the four corners of the earth. But it's a blessing, and everyone needs a blessing.
Native American peoples have a particular sensitivity, perhaps, insofar as they were isolated on this continent. But the interaction of Native peoples on this continent was both intense and plural. There was a very healthy exchange going on long before Europeans arrived on this continent.
The Library of Congress has a diverse collection of Native American materials. Beyond books, the holdings include sound recordings, photographs, and films, as well as collections relating to law and the conquest of the West. The library has compiled a new guide to its Native American collections. Because of the vast quantity of the material, the guide touches only the highlights of the library's holdings, but it has cast new light on collections that were previously somewhat obscure. Another aspect of Native American life preserved at the Library of Congress is a collection of musical instruments, part of the Miller Flute collection held by the library's music division. Traditional music underscores the use of the spoken word that Native Americans still use to pass tribal knowledge to a new generation. Moses Starr is a Cheyenne Indian, traditional healer, and Sundance leader, who is guiding Dave Jackson on his traditional vision quest.
And what we were doing is that we were calling the spirits to come together so that they'll know what we are doing. Now in the Sundance, the people that are involved in it, and that dance and that fast and that, they're in prayers and meditation, but yet they're dancing. The same way in the renewal of the arrows. The one that pledges to renew those arrows, all these others go in to help him to fulfill that pledge. When we paint that drum, what we are asking the Almighty to bless that drum, that everybody that sings at it, everybody that dances with it, to the tune of that drum or the beat of that drum, will feel good. When I'm praying and I can see what He has created, the color of the sky, the cloud, and here you can see the trees, you can see all this that is growing. That's Him.
Native American traditions remind us that whatever our personal beliefs, there is a spiritual dimension that binds us all to our planet. Your local library provides a rich resource for investigation of the fantasy and reality of otherworldly communication. I'm Michael Dorn. Thanks for watching.
Knowledge TV Retro, brought to you by Jones International University, the first fully online accredited university. Change your life for the better on your schedule. 8-week classes begin next month. Visit jiu.edu to find out more.